The dim light of the chandelier cast a warm glow over the luxurious penthouse. The air was thick with the scent of expensive wine and the faint aroma of perfume. I sat in my leather armchair, swirling the glass of whiskey in my hand, watching as my wife, Emma, moved gracefully across the room. She was younger than me by a good 20 years, her body still firm and alluring, her every movement a silent invitation. But tonight my mind was elsewhere. My son, Alex, was sprawled on the couch, his eyes half closed, a bottle of beer dangling from his fingers. He was the spitting image of his mother, my late wife, but with a rebellious streak that I could never quite tame. He had been distant ever since I married Emma, and I could feel the tension between them like a storm waiting to break. Emma walked over to me, her hips swaying with deliberate slowness. She bent down, her lips brushing against my ear as she whispered, "Are you going to sit here all night, or are you going to join me in the bedroom?" I could feel the heat of her breath on my skin, and for a moment, I was tempted. But then I caught Alex's gaze from across the room. His eyes were locked on Emma, a mixture of anger and something else, something I couldn't quite place. I felt a pang of unease, but I brushed it aside. "Later," I said, my voice low and rough. "I need to talk to Alex." Emma straightened up, a flicker of irritation crossing her face, but she nodded and walked away, her heels clicking against the marble floor. I turned my attention to Alex, who was now sitting up, his expression guarded. "What's going on with you and Emma?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. Alex shrugged, avoiding my gaze. "Nothing. She's just not my mom." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I know it's been hard for you, but Emma's here to stay. You need to give her a chance." Alex's jaw tightened, and he looked at me with a mixture of defiance and resentment. "I don't have to do anything. She's not my family." I felt a surge of frustration, but I kept my voice steady. "She's my wife, Alex. That makes her your family whether you like it or not." Alex didn't respond, but the look in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. There was a storm brewing between him and Emma, and I wasn't sure how to stop it. Later that night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Emma was asleep beside me, her body curled against mine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I got up quietly and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights below. I heard a soft noise from the hallway, and I turned to see Alex slipping out the front door. My heart skipped a beat, and I grabbed my robe, following him silently. He didn't notice me as he walked down the street, his hands shoved in his pockets. I kept my distance, my mind racing with questions. He turned a corner and disappeared into a small apartment building. I hesitated for a moment before following him inside. The building was old and run down, a stark contrast to the luxury we lived in. I climbed the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. I reached the third floor and heard muffled voices coming from one of the apartments. I crept closer, my breath catching in my throat as I recognized Emma's voice. She was laughing, a sound that sent a chill down my spine. I pushed the door open slowly, my eyes widening at the scene before me. Emma was on the couch, her dress hiked up around her waist, her legs wrapped around Alex's hips. They were locked in a passionate embrace, their bodies moving together in a rhythm that was both familiar and horrifying. I felt a surge of rage and betrayal, but I couldn't move. I could only watch as they lost themselves in each other, their moans filling the room. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, disgust, and something else, something dark and primal. Finally, I stepped into the room, my voice cold and deadly. "What the hell is going on here?" Emma and Alex froze, their eyes wide with shock. Emma quickly pulled her dress down, her face pale with fear. Alex jumped to his feet, his expression a mixture of guilt and defiance. "Dad, I can explain," he started, but I cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Explain? Explain what? That you're fucking my wife? That you've been sneaking around behind my back?" My voice was shaking with anger, and I could feel the blood rushing to my head. Emma stood up, her hands trembling. James, please. It's not what you think. Not what I think? I laughed bitterly, the sound echoing in the small room. I think it's exactly what it looks like. You're a whore, Emma. And you... I turned to Alex, my eyes blazing with fury. You're a traitor. Alex's face hardened, and he took a step toward me. You don't understand, Dad. Emma and I... Don't you dare... I growled, cutting him off again. Don't you dare try to justify this. You're my son, and she's my wife. This is unforgivable. Emma reached out to me, her eyes pleading. James, please let me explain. It's not what you think. Alex isn't. I didn't let her finish. I grabbed her by the arm, my fingers digging into her flesh. You're coming home with me. We're going to sort this out. And then you're both going to pay for what you've done. I dragged her out of the apartment, ignoring her protests. Alex followed behind us, his face a mask of anger and fear. The storm that had been brewing between them had finally broken, and I was caught in the middle, my world collapsing around me. The drive back home was silent, the tension in the car so thick it felt like it could suffocate us all. Emma sat in the passenger seat, her hands clenched in her lap, her eyes staring straight ahead. Alex was in the back, his arms crossed, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought it might crack. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts, none of them good. When we finally arrived at the house, I didn't wait for them to get out. I slammed the car door shut and stormed inside, my anger boiling over. Emma and Alex followed, their footsteps hesitant, as if they were walking into a lion's den. I turned to face them in the living room, my voice low and dangerous. Start talking. Now. Emma glanced at Alex, her eyes filled with fear and something else, something that made my stomach churn. She took a deep breath and said, James, I know this looks bad, but you have to understand. Understand? I interrupted, my voice rising. Understand what? That my wife and my son are having an affair? That you've been lying to me this whole time? Alex stepped forward, his face pale but determined. Dad, it's not like that. Emma and I... Don't... I snapped, cutting him off. Don't you dare try to justify this. You're my son, Alex. My son. And she's my wife. How could you do this to me? Emma's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was steady. James, you need to know the truth. Alex isn't your son. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Here. My mind struggling to process what she had just said. What are you talking about? Emma took a step closer, her hands trembling. Alex isn't your biological son. He's the son of your late wife's ex-lover. You've been raising him as your own, but he's not yours. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I looked at Alex, my heart pounding in my chest. Is this true? Alex's face was a mask of pain and guilt. He nodded slowly. I didn't know until recently. Emma told me. I turned back to Emma, my voice shaking with rage. And when were you planning on telling me this? Or were you just going to keep it a secret while you fucked my son? Emma flinched, but she didn't back down. I was going to tell you, James. I swear. But I didn't know how. I didn't want to hurt you. Too late for that. I spat, my voice dripping with venom. You've been lying to me from the start. You married me just to get close to him, didn't you? Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't deny it. I love him, James. I always have. We were together before I met you, but we had to break up because of the age difference. When I found out you were his father, stepfather, I corrected, my voice cold. I'm not his father. Not anymore. Emma's tears spilled over, but she didn't argue. I thought if I married you, I could be close to him. I didn't mean for this to happen, but I couldn't stay away from him. I felt a surge of disgust and betrayal, but I forced myself to stay calm. Get out. Emma's eyes widened in shock. What? Get out of my house? I repeated, my voice deadly calm. Both of you. I don't want to see either of you ever again. Alex stepped forward, his face pale. Dad, please. Don't call me that. I snapped, cutting him off. You're not my son. Not anymore. Get out. Emma and Alex exchanged a glance, their faces filled with fear and desperation. But they didn't argue. They turned and walked out the door, leaving me alone in the silence of the house. I sank into the couch, my mind reeling. The man I had raised as my son wasn't mine. The woman I had married had been using me to get to him. My whole life had been a lie. I felt a surge of anger and pain, but I pushed it down. Couldn't let them win. I couldn't let them destroy me. But as I sat there in the silence, I knew that the storm was far from over. And when it finally broke, there would be no turning back. The days that followed were a blur of anger, betrayal, and a gnawing emptiness that I couldn't shake. I didn't leave the house. I didn't answer calls. I just sat in the dimly lit living room, nursing a bottle of whiskey, replaying the events in my mind over and over again. The image of Emma and Alex together haunted me, a sickening loop that I couldn't escape. I thought about calling the police, about exposing them for what they had done. But what would that accomplish? It would only drag my name through the mud, and I had already lost enough. No, this was something I had to handle on my own. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I heard a knock at the door. I didn't move at first, thinking it was just my imagination. But then it came again, louder this time. I set the whiskey bottle down and walked to the door, my heart pounding in my chest. When I opened it, I was surprised to see Emma standing there, her face pale and her eyes red from crying. She looked like a ghost of the woman I had married, her once vibrant beauty now dulled by guilt and fear. "James," she said softly, her voice trembling. "Can we talk?" I stared at her for a moment, my jaw clenched. "You've got 5 minutes." She nodded and stepped inside, her eyes darting around the room as if she were afraid of what I might do. I closed the door behind her and crossed my arms, waiting for her to speak. "James, I'm so sorry," she began, her voice breaking. "I never meant to hurt you. I couldn't stay away from him. I love him." I felt a surge of anger, but I forced myself to stay calm. "You love him? You're married to me, Emma. Or did you forget that?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I know, and I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you, but I couldn't help it. Alex and we've always had this connection. I thought I could move on, but I couldn't." I took a step closer to her, my voice low and dangerous. "So you married me just to get close to him? You used me, Emma. You used me to get to my son." She flinched at the word son, but she didn't deny it. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this. I thought I could be happy with you, but I couldn't. I'm sorry, James. I'm so sorry." I stared at her, my mind racing. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to make her feel even a fraction of the pain I was feeling. But instead, I just felt empty. "Get out," I said, my voice cold and final. "I don't want to see you again." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't argue. She turned and walked out the door, leaving me alone once again. But as I stood there in the silence, I knew that this wasn't over. Emma and Alex had betrayed me in the worst possible way, and I couldn't just let them walk away. They had to pay. I grabbed my car keys and headed out the door, my mind set on one thing: revenge. I drove to the apartment building where I had caught them together, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. When I arrived, I parked the car and sat there for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew that I couldn't let them get away with this. They had destroyed my life, and now it was my turn to destroy theirs. I got out of the car and walked up to the apartment, my footsteps heavy with purpose. When I reached the door, I didn't knock. I just kicked it open, the sound of splintering wood echoing through the hallway. Emma and Alex were inside, their eyes wide with shock. They were sitting on the couch, their bodies close together, but they quickly pulled apart when they saw me. "James," Emma said, her voice trembling. "What are you doing here?" I didn't answer. I just walked over to them, my eyes blazing with fury. Alex stood up, his face pale but determined. "Dad, please," he said, his voice shaking. "Let's talk about this." I didn't give him a chance to finish. I grabbed him by the collar and slammed him against the wall, my anger boiling over. "You're not my son," I growled, my voice low and deadly. "You're nothing to me." Alex's eyes widened in fear, but he didn't fight back. He just stood there, his body trembling as I held him against the wall. "James, please," Emma begged, her voice filled with desperation. "Don't do this." I turned to her, my eyes blazing with fury. "You don't get to tell me what to do. You've done enough damage already." I let go of Alex and turned to Emma, my mind consumed by rage. I grabbed her by the arm and dragged her to the door, my grip so tight that I knew it would leave bruises. "James, please," she cried, her voice filled with fear. "Don't do this." But I didn't listen. I just kept dragging her, my mind set on one thing: making them pay for what they had done. When we reached the car, I shoved her inside and slammed the door shut. I got in the driver's seat and started the engine, my hands shaking with anger. "Where are we going?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. I didn't answer. I just drove, my mind racing with thoughts of revenge. They had destroyed my life, and now it was my turn to destroy theirs. The car sped through the empty streets, the silence inside heavy and suffocating. Emma sat in the passenger seat, her hands trembling, her eyes darting toward me every few seconds as if trying to gauge my next move. I didn't look at her. My focus was on the road ahead, my mind a whirlwind of anger, betrayal, and a cold, calculated need for retribution. "James," Emma finally broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please talk to me. Where are we going?" I didn't respond. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, my knuckles white. The truth was, I didn't know where I was taking her. All I knew was that I couldn't let her go. Not yet. Not until she understood the depth of what she had done. "James," she tried again, her voice cracking. "I know I've hurt you, but this isn't the way. Please, just let me explain." "Explain?" I finally snapped, my voice sharp and cutting. "What's there to explain? Emma, you married me to get close to my son. You lied to me. You betrayed me. There's no explanation that can fix that." She flinched, tears welling up in her eyes. "I never wanted to hurt you, I swear. I thought I could move on. But I couldn't. Alex and we have a history, connection. I tried to fight it, but I couldn't." "A connection?" I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow and cold. "You call betraying me a connection? You're sick, Emma. Both of you." She didn't argue. She just sat there, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her tears falling silently. I didn't care. She could cry all she wanted. It wouldn't change what she had done. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, the city lights blurring into a haze of red and gold. Eventually, I found myself on a deserted road, the kind of place where no one would hear her scream. I pulled over and turned off the engine, the silence pressing in around us. Emma looked around, her eyes wide with fear. "James, what are you doing?" I didn't answer. I just got out of the car and walked around to her side, yanking the door open. She hesitated, but I grabbed her arm and pulled her out, her body stumbling as she tried to keep up with me. "James, please," she begged, her voice trembling. "Don't do this. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I didn't listen. I dragged her toward the edge of the road, where the trees loomed dark and ominous. She struggled, but I was stronger, my grip unrelenting. "James, stop," she cried, her voice rising in panic. "You're scaring me." "Good," I growled, my voice low and dangerous. "You should be scared. You've been playing with fire, Emma, and now you're going to get burned." I pushed her against a tree, my hands pinning her shoulders as I leaned in close, my breath hot against her face. She stared up at me, her eyes wide with fear, her body trembling. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I hissed, my voice shaking with rage. "You've destroyed my life, my family, my trust. And for what? For some twisted affair with my son?" "James, please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I never meant to hurt you. I couldn't stay away from him. I felt a surge of disgust, and I pulled back, releasing her. She slumped against the tree, her body shaking as she tried to catch her breath. "You're pathetic," I spat, my voice filled with contempt. "Both of you. You think you're in love? You think this is some grand romance? It's sick. It's disgusting. And I'm not going to let you get away with it." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears. "What are you going to do?" I didn't answer. I just turned and walked back to the car, leaving her standing there in the darkness. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew one thing. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I got back in the car and started the engine, my hands gripping the wheel tightly. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Emma still standing by the tree, her figure small and fragile in the darkness. For a moment, I felt a pang of guilt, but I quickly pushed it aside. She had brought this on herself. They both had. I drove away, leaving her behind, my mind racing with thoughts of what to do next. I couldn't let them get away with this. I couldn't let them destroy my life and walk away unscathed. They had to pay, and I was going to make sure they did. But as I drove through the empty streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The storm was far from over, and when it finally broke, there would be no turning back. The next few days were a blur of planning and plotting. I didn't sleep. I barely ate. My mind was consumed by one thing: revenge. Emma and Alex had taken everything from me. My trust, my family, my sense of self. I couldn't let them walk away unscathed. They had to pay. I started by gathering evidence. I hired a private investigator to dig into Emma's past, to uncover every secret she had tried to hide. It didn't take long for the truth to come out. Emma had a history of manipulating men, of using them for her own gain. She had been involved in multiple affairs, each one more scandalous than the last. And Alex, he wasn't just her lover. He was her accomplice. Together, they had orchestrated a plan to take everything from me. My money, my reputation, my life. I felt a cold satisfaction as I read the investigator's report. They thought they were so clever, so untouchable, but they had underestimated me. And now they were going to regret it. I called a lawyer, a ruthless man who specialized in high-stakes divorces and defamation cases. I laid out everything I had learned, every piece of evidence I had gathered. He listened carefully, his eyes gleaming with interest. "This is explosive," he said when I finished. "With this, we can destroy them both. But are you sure you want to go through with this? Once we start, there's no turning back." I didn't hesitate. "Do it." The lawyer nodded, a grim smile on his face. "Consider it done." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal battles and public scandals. Emma and Alex were dragged through the mud, their names plastered across every tabloid and news outlet. The evidence against them was damning, and they had no way to defend themselves. Their affair was exposed, their lies unraveled, their reputations destroyed. Emma tried to reach out to me, to beg for mercy, but I ignored her. She had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. Alex, on the other hand, went silent. He disappeared from the public eye, retreating into the shadows where he belonged. I watched it all unfold with a sense of grim satisfaction. They had tried to destroy me, but in the end, they had only destroyed themselves. I had won, or so I thought. One evening, as I sat in my now empty penthouse, I received a call from an unknown number. I hesitated before answering, a sense of unease creeping over me. "Hello," I said, my voice cautious. "James," a familiar voice replied, cold and menacing. It was Alex. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I kept my voice steady. "What do you want?" "I want you to know that this isn't over," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You think you've won, but you're wrong. You've just made things worse." I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "You're in no position to threaten me, Alex. You've lost everything." "Have I?" he replied, his voice dripping with venom. "You may have taken my reputation, but I still have one thing you don't." "And what's that?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Emma," he said, his voice filled with a twisted satisfaction. She's still mine, and she always will be. I felt a surge of anger, but I forced myself to stay calm. You're delusional, Alex. Emma's gone. She's nothing to me now. Maybe, he said, his voice cold, but she's everything to me. And I'm not going to let you take her away. Before I could respond, the line went dead. I sat there, the phone still in my hand, my mind racing. Alex's words echoed in my head, a chilling reminder that this wasn't over. Not yet. I knew then that I had to be careful. Alex was dangerous and he was desperate. He had nothing left to lose, and that made him unpredictable. Couldn't let my guard down. Not now. But as I sat there in the silence, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something, that there was more to this than I realized. Emma and Alex had played their hand, but I had a feeling that the game wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And when the final move was made, I would be ready. Because this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about survival. And I wasn't going to let them win. Not again.